Hi, my name is Vahab, and in this video, I'm going to actually share my experience on how to travel safely during the pandemic, during the COVID time. And as counterintuitive as it sounds, actually stay away from catching the virus while traveling to different countries and different cities. A little bit about me, I'm a professor of computer science, but at the same time, I love traveling. It's part of my passion besides computer science. So I travel the world as much as I can. Prior to the pandemic, I traveled to 90 countries, but during the pandemic alone, up to now, I traveled to 28 countries. And that was continuously. So I'm going to talk about, again, how to actually travel safely and when to travel that is actually safe. So where to and when to, and all of it only using data. All right, so since we are in a very dynamic pandemic, things actually change. So we have to adapt the way we look at the data and what sort of data we look at and so on. So I'm going to actually talk about the different phases and how I actually use the data to travel to these countries. And hopefully you understand the trends and you could actually adapt based on whatever the situation of the pandemic is. When you watch this video and you would like to actually travel to. Right, so at the very beginning of the pandemic, that around April 2020, that's when we knew that, well, this pandemic is not going to be over anytime soon. That's when I decided to actually leave my hometown of San Francisco and just travel to somewhere that is safe. Number one reason, obviously, was I wanted to not catch COVID. Second reason is that I wanted to be somewhere that there's no lockdown. There was a massive lockdown or extensive lockdown in California, so I wanted to actually be away from it and live a normal life. So both of them together. So also we knew that I knew that at least for a little bit of time, my work will be online. Wasn't sure until when, but I thought, okay, well, as long as it is online, I'll just make out of it. Initially, to be honest, I thought it's probably only 3 months of working online. Obviously, I knew that the pandemic is not going to be over because we knew that the vaccine is not going to be out at least until December of 2020. But at least work-wise, I knew that I had about 3 months. So let's start. So the website that actually helped me a lot with this was the worldometer.info/coronavirus that actually keeps a tally of all these different countries' confirmed cases. So first, we need to, especially back in the day, I'm talking about the beginning of the pandemic, I chose the countries that are not only safe based on the data, but also that I actually trust their data. Trusting data, one, means that you actually trust how their health system and the government actually keeps a record of these numbers. So that eliminated a lot of countries at the time that I wasn't very sure that they actually have the right data. Second is that you need to know that you need to know another very important number, which is the number of tests that are actually being administered, and then the ratio of that, the confirmed cases. So pretty much what we call the positivity rate. That number is not an easy number to actually find, especially back in the day. It was not that easy. But I'm going to explain like how I actually managed to actually find those info. So at that time, four of the countries that I actually trusted their health system, and also they had low numbers, were New Zealand, Iceland, Taiwan, and South Korea. And talking about April 2020, obviously, these countries, some of them were not as safe a few months later or a year later. But I'm talking about just the data that I was looking at in April 2020. So how we find the information about taking the confirmed cases? Well, this website was the most reliable one. So the way that I actually use it is that, for instance, like I wanted to know how South Korea is doing. So I was actually going in South Korea, and then not only looking at this data here, so not only looking at the data here, the daily new cases, but also looking at a more thorough, pretty much description and detailed of this information. So, so every country, there's going to be actually a source here next to it, which actually points to most cases to their CDC website. So this website is actually looks different from when I looked at it back in April 2020. Now there's a lot of graphics, a lot of visuals, a lot more details. So, and even has the English version. Back then I just had to actually use Google Translate to do that. But the interesting thing is that it actually tells you by regions as well too. So I knew exactly, okay, which regions in South Korea actually contributes to the most cases. There were even regions back in the day, again, back in April and May of 2020, there were regions in South Korea that there was 0 confirmed cases. So you go to those provinces or those regions, and you know that you're safe. Obviously, there's always a probability of possibility of having some undetected cases that moved from the other counties, but the probability is very low. Again, when you divide it by the population. So in South Korea, back in the day, Seoul and the surrounding province was the pretty much the epicenter at the time. Obviously, this has the highest population and also the most dense population of South Korea. So when I went to South Korea, I actually did travel to the rest of the country. I still monitored how the rest of the country is doing, and that's how I proceed with the rest of my trip. I did end up settling for about a month and a half to 2 months in Seoul for the remaining part of my stay in South Korea. But that was when the cases actually, even in Seoul, dropped. There are a lot more information here. So again, it could be very detailed. And also, there was another information there that I'm pretty sure you can find it. So maybe like here versus status and so on, which actually tells you exactly also how many of these cases, confirmed cases, are actually imported. And in South Korea, it was actually showing exactly which countries they were imported from. So that case, the number, it actually helped me to also identify whether the flight that I'm taking from the States to South Korea is going to be problematic because or dangerous, because I was looking how many of the imported cases are actually from the US. And at the time, there weren't that many. They were mostly from other countries. So that also showed me that, okay, the flight could be actually relatively safe. I'm not going to get into how to fly safely and so on. This time, obviously, it's a different time now than back then, but I took every precautions as I could have. I did a lot of research on where to sit on the flight, what to do, and so on. And luckily, I was actually safe. Also, talking about flights taken in the summer of 2020, when the flights were relatively empty and everyone was social distancing. All right, so one thing about these imported cases is that because the number we see here it actually includes all cases, both domestic and imported. So that's why it was very important at the time to know what's the percentage. Because again, the imported cases, at that time, they were actually going to quarantine. So that's another thing to know. Okay, if the country actually asked if everyone that actually entered the country to quarantine, then you could be fairly confident that it's not going to leak out of that quarantine facility. There were counterexamples to that in various occasions, but for the most part, that assumption is safe. So wanted to talk about positivity rate as well too, because that was very important factor for me. The positivity rate again means how many tests are being administrated divided by the number of confirmed cases, or actually the other way around. And you want that number to be very, very low. So that means that the country actually tests enough people to make sure that there are no to very few undetected cases. I'll give you an example. For South Korea, at that time, the number of cases were less than 50 confirmed cases per day. The population of South Korea is 52 million, roughly. So less than 50 confirmed cases. And there were about 25 to 30,000 tests were being administrated at the time. So that shows that, well, yeah, let's say 27,000 tests are being done to actually detect those 50 cases. So obviously that positivity rate is very, very low. So that shows that, well, the data is very reliable. So whatever number you see here as the confirmed cases is probably the right number, or very close to it. So how do I find the positivity rate? That's actually something that you have to do a lot of digging, and every country is different where they actually provided. For South Korea, it was very difficult for me to find that information, and I only found it on the English-speaking TV channel in South Korea, which is Ion News, and when they had the news, when they actually talked about the number of cases per day, they also mentioned the number of tests that were administered. So that's how I found it for South Korea. I found the channel. Luckily, they put all their news on YouTube, so I didn't have to like log in a certain time to watch it. But every day I was actually checking this number. So this is for South Korea, and then again, every country actually has that info. So if you go to you pick any country, you're going to actually see that source, and that source, depending on how elaborate that country is, their CDC or health care system, they would actually have that information available. So now this is pretty much how I decided to actually go to South Korea, and then how I decided to go to Taiwan. Well, Taiwan had 0 domestic cases for months that I actually pretty much lived there, because I spent for 7 months there. But then we had the vaccine. So when we have the vaccine, then you have another data to look at, the vaccination rate. And when we were talking about the original strain of the virus, the vaccination was very effective. A lot of countries, the cases dropped when the vaccination rate went up. Obviously, later on, we had the other variants, and that didn't really show to be effective. So during that period of time, so again, so the first part that I was talking about, it goes from the beginning, April 2020, so pretty much all the way to June of 2021. June of 2021, that's when we had fairly good number of countries that actually had a high vaccination rate, and as a result, the number of cases actually dropped. So this is pretty much the before Delta variant started to actually rage and create another peak. So for those countries, I used the vaccination rate. You could actually find a vaccination rate by just literally searching, let's say if I want to say United States vaccination rate, then you could actually find that. So pretty much the first dose and so on. The Google is in German just because I'm in Austria right now. So you could actually see that. So and then sometimes you could actually look at the slope and see, well, by the time that you're going to go there, you could estimate how many those will be straight, so and so on. So anyway, so this is pretty much how to find the vaccination rate, and this data also helped me to kind of like find the next best country to visit, because it's not going to be only the number of cases, but also the vaccination rate as well. So based on that, I started to actually travel to a few countries. Most of the smaller countries in terms of population were the ones that they actually had a higher vaccination rate at the time, just because they were smaller. So I did visit some of those countries, more specifically in the Caribbean. So then we had the Delta, and then we had the Omicron. So things change in terms of just looking at the vaccination. And also the countries like Taiwan and South Korea, these countries that we actually were holding on not having COVID spread out, they also lost that catch. So it's pretty much like at that point, there was almost no country in the world, almost no country in the world that was actually that safe. But the next data that I actually used now to travel was natural immunity, and pretty much like how fast widespread the virus is at the time. So I use another technique for Delta and Omicron time. So for that, you pretty much, again, look at the data, but you look at the data and see where the peak is. So I'm going to actually use an example again, maybe like South Korea. So when we look at the daily cases, so pretty much you can see that, well, this is a peak. So this is actually their Omicron peak. There was a Delta peak, and then this is now 0 here. the cases were so small that we can't really see them here. But if you look at, when you look at the data, so maybe I should actually just use some other country that we could actually see the peaks of the waves more clearly. So maybe US. So pretty much here when we, so this is actually when US had the high vaccination rate by this time. So that's why the cases are very low now. But then this is the Delta, and then this is the Omicron wave. So when we're talking about the Delta here, you could see that, so when you're around here, so first of all, you hear in the, it's not a speculation. So you kind of like hear already that, well, there is this Delta wave. There are countries that are actually already experiencing the Delta, especially where they're originated from. That's where you could actually look at what the pattern is and how the pattern of pretty much the spread is. Like, for instance, for the Delta, I believe that was in India when it was actually identified first. So that's the country that you could actually go and look at the pattern and see, well, how it's going to look, and if it's going to peak anytime soon, and so on. And then you could kind of apply it to other countries. So because other countries are going to actually have a delayed sort of peak compared to the country that experienced it first or identified first. So in this case, we know that, well, this is actually going to happen. We're going to have another peak, and then how long is going to last? Well, there are a lot of different factors like population and sort of like COVID measures and so on. But more or less, they follow similar patterns, regardless of those factors. So when I went, so where did I choose to go? Actually, I went to Poland. I started to hear about Delta. I went to Poland around here, so in September. And that was pretty much the peak of the vaccination rate. So that's why there's like very low cases. But then the Delta actually arrived, and I left the Poland around this time, like early October. And it was, I knew that it's coming. I was just waiting, and I was looking at data, and when I said it, I left. So this was actually the peak. So I was not there when this happened. I actually flew to the States when that happened during that time, and US was actually already in like pretty much like past the peak and already in low cases. So again, countries, they follow the same pattern more or less for the variants. It just that it's a little bit delayed, some countries versus the others. But from the history of the country that originated this, or the country that started to actually experience the peak, like for instance, United States experienced the peak of Delta before Poland. In that case, you could pretty much predict what's going to happen and be more cautious, obviously, when there's a peak. I just chose to not to be that country during that peak. So as soon as it just takes off, I was leaving. And then we have the Omicron. So Omicron had a different pattern. It's very steep. So tail to tail actually is much shorter because it spread so fast. Also, the peak was much higher because, again, it spread so fast. So in November, like late November, that's when I was planning a trip in Africa in late January. And that's when Omicron started to, actually identified in South Africa. When that happened, that's when I decided to actually go to South Africa. So that was pretty much 2 months after when it was identified. Well, yes, everyone was very worried about Omicron, South Africa, everything. But if you look at the data, we knew that no waves in the past lasted more than 2 months. As a matter of fact, Omicron was so contagious, it actually didn't last even that long, but all other peaks were just 2 months. So that's why in late November, when the first case was identified in South Africa and a few countries in the south of Southern Africa, that's when I decided I'm going to go there, because I knew that, well, at that time, which is going to be late January, those countries probably going to be the safest places in the world to be, because they already going to actually pass their Omicron wave, being somewhere here, and the other countries now they're going to actually experience the delay Omicron. So, and that speculation actually happened to be correct, because if you look at it here, I arrived in first Ethiopia, but then in South Africa by January 29th. So this was pretty much the Omicron wave, and around this time, that's when I arrived in South Africa. So this also tells you that the timing is also very important. So it's not just about the number of cases and all of those measures that we talked about, also the timing. So when is the best time to actually go to a country? It's right at the end of a wave. That's when for a couple of reasons. One is that a lot of people are actually very aware of these COVID measures and sanitization and everything. So everyone is very careful because it just experienced a peak or wave. But the other reason also is that you have natural immunity in the community. When I was in South Africa, I heard that there were some informal measures that perhaps more than 50% of the population have natural immunity with Omicron. So again, I don't know if that was correct or not. The fact is that South Africa wasn't testing extensively, especially with Omicron, that there's so many cases. They couldn't obviously keep up. But there is some truth to that statement. So there are a lot of people who actually got it, but didn't get tested. So their cases are not there. So that's, again, that's when I was actually there. I had this trip to Africa, especially most of the Southern African countries. And that was exactly the time that they experienced the wave already. So it was probably the safest time to be there. So another example I want to actually talk about is actually Thailand. I was in Thailand for 1 month, from December 19th to January 20th. And this is an example of a country that I use, of course, a vaccination rate as a measure to decide to go to that country. But also I noticed that, well, the cases are actually this is the peak, this is the wave. So this is exactly when I entered the country. So right at that time. But the country was rather unlucky in a sense that um, they really didn't have that much relief here, and the next wave started. So I left on January 20th exactly. So around here, but I remember I was uh, carefully watching the news, following the data, because I knew that Omicron is going to come. And once I see a spike, then that's when I actually started to limit some of my activities. So I didn't go to the markets. I still went to restaurants and things like that, or malls or whatever, but I just was more aware of the situation. One is that, yes, I just didn't want to get COVID, especially in a foreign country. But the other case, or the other reason was that I wanted to make sure that I'm constantly tested negative because of all these travels. So I was going to go to Africa. All my travels would have been canceled if I tested positive. So that's when you could actually kind of like start change your behavior as well too. And now I want to talk about the timing again. The timing is when is the best time to actually travel. So, and again, as we talked about, the best time to travel is always right after the wave, so at the tail of the wave. But can you predict it? So can you, like, if I want to plan it like a month or 2 months in advance, can you do it? Well, the answer is yes. So this is exactly how I did it for also Jordan and Lebanon when I went in March. When I realized that the cases are actually rising in Jordan and Lebanon, luckily they actually rose at the same time, so I could actually plan to go to both countries, one after the other, because that's when they experience the end of the wave. So around this time, this is when I decided to actually go to Lebanon and Jordan, because I knew that this is going up, and I knew that this is not going to last longer than 2 months. So I plan to go there around exactly this time. So I bought my tickets for those times, and when I actually went, it did follow the pattern that I actually expected. So you can actually see Lebanon in this case too. It's still loading, but anyways, that was pretty much the reason. So that was the reason I actually, or how I decided to actually go to Lebanon and Jordan. So as I said, the timing actually matters, and that's how we could actually figure out when is a good time to actually go to either of these countries, to any of these countries. The other data also matters, looking at the pattern, the data, and then also when we know that there's a variant, then we also know that there's going to be a delayed wave in various countries. So I hope this helps you to plan to have a safe trip during the pandemic. Obviously, things have changed since when I started to travel back in early 2020. But as I said, it is important to actually adapt and adjust based on the mm, other information that actually come, and the way that the pandemic behaves and so on. So again, there's a lot of other factors that we need to actually look into, but looking at this sort of data is the most important factor. At least it was the most important factor for me to decide where I'm going to travel and when I'm going to travel.